Hello, and welcome to First Christian Church's Adult Fellowship Bible Study. We continue with our in-depth study of the epistle to the Colossians. We are nearing the end. At this point, the authors sort of abandon the co-crucifixion, co-resurrection issues that they had covered over the last lesson or two. And they move now into sort of a session that's been dropped in called the Household Rules or Household Code of Conduct. The objective seems to be that if you Colossians are Christians, then allow Christ's Lordship to shape your household relationship for all in the house is good. Or what I should say, for the good of all in the household. Now let's read that in the New Revised Standard Version, Colossians chapter 3, verses 18 through the first verse of chapter 4. Wives, be subject to your husbands, as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives, and never treat them harshly. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this is your acceptable duty in the Lord. Fathers, do not provoke your children, or they may lose heart. Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, not only while being watched and in order to please them, but wholeheartedly, fearing the Lord. Whatever your task, put yourselves into it as done for the Lord and not for your master, since you know that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You serve the Lord Christ, for the wrongdoer will be paid back for whatever wrong has been done, and there is no partiality. Masters, treat your slaves justly and fairly, for you know that you also have a master in heaven. Several scholars start here with, in their commentaries, by noting that the code, as stated, is simple and direct and not at all difficult to understand. Therefore, they don't focus too much on its individual meaning, but on some general issues related to it. Many focus initially on the origins or source of this code. Did it originate with Christianity, or did it exist previously in the pagan culture or in Judaism maybe? Most conclude the data supports a pre-Christian pagan code that was used in Western Asia and the general Mediterranean area that was also evolving at this time. The Christian community just makes some modifications to adapt it to Christianity. Some would argue it may even predate Judaism, its existence in this region. Not that the Jews didn't have a similar one, but the particular version that existed in this area was different from what was in Jerusalem area. A strong school of arguments relate in these scholarly arguments, relates it to teachings of Aristotle from about 350 BC or maybe even earlier. It appears to have had some strong support among the ruling Greek leaders of the time and later among the Roman leaders over a roughly 400-year period up until this period of time in mid to late 1st century AD, when Christianity establishes in the area. Colossians is a complete letter without this code inserted. Several Bible scholars note. And the code seems to stand alone without the need of any scripture that precedes it or follows it. Though it seems to be, several say, that it most likely was adopted here for some reason, that Christianity felt a need to bring that code in and Christianize it a little bit, but for the most part not create waves, one scholar says. This code idea is not found in the undisputed letters of Paul, except for Philippians, and of course there's some people now questioning whether Philippians is truly written by Paul. But it is found in the late letters in the New Testament, such as 1 Peter, 1 Timothy, Titus, and Ephesians. It is not present in the Synoptic Gospels as a teaching of Jesus. Evidence of it is present, however, in Hellenistic Judaism writings from this region at the time that Jesus would have been around. And it's also present in non-canon Christian writings at roughly this time, and of course later. Based on social historical writings, there is little evidence to reflect this code separates the church's family households, at least on an ethical basis, from the general population's ethics relative to family. As a result, some scholars conclude that Christianity may have adopted it formally as a means to show they were not teaching something to disrupt family order of the day in this region. Dr. Margaret McDonald, who's also a sociologist, notes that 1 Peter is very strong to that point. In other words, a later epistle. For the Lord's sake, accept the authority of every human institution. And so this issue of the church trying to make sure certain things didn't change or didn't get changed a lot was probably an important part of early church survival, some scholars note. Of course, the Lord has referred here to, the Lord is being referred to here in this code was not the kings or emperors, but is Jesus Christ. The following pairs of family relationships are covered by the exhortations or commands, if you will, that are given here. Wives-husband relationships, children-parent relationship, and slave-master relationships. Aristotle taught that the household was a microcosm of the state. Some scholars suggest this household code, as presented in Colossians, is a manner, and it's presented in a manner to clarify Christianity is not doing something that much different, and establishing the oneness with Christ of that household code. It is key to note that the head of the house is to be subordinate to Christ as Lord, and all others in that house then are to be subject to the head of the house. There are some who say this is just Christianity, though supporting patriarchalism system that existed at that day and time and extending it further in history. And that section ends there in verse 4, first verse of 1, with a very strong reminder to that head of that house that his master is in heaven, and it's that master who will judge him, and therefore his actions as head of the household need to be consistent with the wishes of that Lord in heaven. Dr. Scott McKnight and other scholars teach that running throughout this household code is a powerful honor-shame code that pre-existed probably this household code in general, and was in vogue both in the Roman culture, in the Greek culture, and especially in the culture here in this area of Turkey. It included everything from birth status, lineage, so to speak, place of birth, the gender, the social patterns, social positions, wealth, military ranks, governmental ranks, etc. The mate had the male had an obligation to protect his kin group and family, and to fail at that was considered total cowardice, and you were completely dishonored. In other words, that's the code that underneath the current across this region, and gets stronger as you go into the Baltics, they say. At the same time, the code as written here does challenge the pure Roman honor code that also existed. The Roman code was a little different. The Lord here, of course, is referring clearly to Christ as Lord and not Caesar. Dr. Jerry Sumney notes that in the literary context, Colossians has proclaimed that Christ is the ruler of the cosmos. That's been argued from the get-go in the beginning here of Colossians, as he has defeated and subjected all the powers that now control the world. And such is assumed, he says here, in this adoption of this code. Sumney and others also call attention to the fact that the code couches its instructions in the present imperative tense. Thus, the writer intends these commands to be a continued part of the way people relate to one another within their relationships under Christ. Hence, these approaches to the family are becoming an established behavior of the believers who exist in the church. Seems to be the position that these authors are taking here in Colossians. Scholars note that the household code starts by exhorting the wife and then the husband. Why is she first? Gets asked by a lot of people. They say because it was the central relationship in the household, and it was normal culture in the Greco-Roman culture also, and normally the person who has to submit is listed first. Wives were expected to submit to the husband's authority in all things in that culture and time and space. Dr. Margaret MacDonald, who's a sociologist as well as a theologian, notes that as stated here in Colossians, this is a more patriarchal approach with respect to women than is found in the undisputed letters of Paul. She notes it is justified theologically here as a command with the phrase, as is fitting in the Lord, and therefore implies that it is your Christian duty to submit. Whether you be the wife, whether you be the slave, or whether you be the child. Hellenistic Jewish literature of the period holds such an arrangement of order. Their justification was that it was the natural order of things. So Christianity has made a slight adoption here, scholars note. Scholars disagree somewhat as to whether such arrangements were actually norms in the culture prior to this, or has something changed. And they're suspicious that there's something a little bit different, but they haven't found the smoking gun, so to speak, yet. That is command is followed closely by another command for the husband to love your wife and not to be do anything makes them against you. This is one place the church's position and the outside world differed, some scholars do find. Love was not considered important to marriage in the world at that time. In earlier chapters, love was listed as a critical Christian virtue. So the call for love here is a Christianization of the household code, and likely carries the weight of mutual submission for all Christians, or all Christian believers. Clearly, this is an important upgrade in the household code, notes several scholars. Dr. Andrew L. Lincoln, who's a English a scholar in Great Britain, and in his compendium he notes that this embitterment issue that's raised here is an important condition that reorients the marriage in a Christian family. The husband must not act in ways that cause bitterness for the wife. Thus, Christianity is placing greater responsibility on the husband than we find in the Greco-Roman writings of that society and time. Dr. Jerry Sumney sums up verses 18 and 19 there by saying, "This command instructs husbands to live this life in love, a love pattern after self-giving of Christ and that of Paul, without allowing your subordinates to develop embitterment towards you, nor you surrendering your authority." And after all, somebody says, if you create embitterment, you in fact lose part of that authority. Paul then shifts from husband and wife to parent-children relationship. The household children are to obey their parents in every respect, teaches Dr. Michael Bird. And then he asks why. Because it is pleasing to the Lord, which is the key motivation for Christians. That's the grounds that this command is issued on. And just like with the wife, the father is not to antagonize their children, but do things to build them up. As the text moves next to master and slave relationships that existed in that culture, some suggest that this was there because there was a lot of slaves in the church itself. And there's good evidence to indicate that a significant number of the people who were going to the churches at that time were slaves. Dr. Margaret McDonald says, note, this is much more detailed, specific, relative to the slave master than is found in the other sets of instructions here. And yet they closely match the instructions for the children, but with emphasis on the work. With that work is to be done for the master, and both, and implied meaning, she says there, is that master is both your master, the Lord Jesus Christ, and your earthly master, the head of the house. In no way, McDonald notes, can these verses, however, be calling for emancipation of slaves within Christianity. At least not at that time. There's just nothing there, she says. But rather a very strong demand that the master not abuse their authority. Their treatments are to be just and fair. And those just and fair treatments, of course, are subject, the master is subject to the Lord, their Lord, and that Lord is the one in heaven. I hope this gives you some understanding how the scholars see this household code here in Colossians, and have a good Bible study, and we'll see you in the next lesson.